So in Kiowa, though, you have this little prefix before the verb, and it will tell you who the subject is, who the object is, and who the dative is. And so you get, say, bao ya at bao, I'm chasing the cat, versus bao a at bao, you are chasing the cat, and so forth. And there are dozens of these forms, thousands of possible combinations, and almost all of them have one syllable, and they often only differ in tone. One of the things I've made is a chart. I should have brought a chart. Oh, I might have it with me. I don't have it. Oh yeah, I have it. So here's a chart that I made of the different prefixes and the different sets of prefixes that you have. I'll pass it around. And you can see how minute and how much repetition there is. And these are things that Kiowa speakers just know. They don't mess these up. But trying to teach this to a kid, right? So in Spanish you learn the difference between hablo and hablas, right? Depending on who's speaking. But then in Kiowa you also have to know what's being spoken and who's being spoken to, because those will all affect that. And then there's also some other aspects of verb conjugation. So there's negation, mood, modality, and then what's called evidentiality. And this is a category that was first discovered in American languages. It's frequent in North American languages, and it's been found elsewhere around the world. But it's not common in Europe. And it basically tells you how you found out this information. So in Kiowa, if you know something firsthand, you don't say anything different. But if you heard about it from somebody, you have to add a marker. Just like in English, if you're talking about the past, you have to add past tense. In Kiowa, if you only heard about it, you have to mark it, even if you believe it, even if it's true. So if someone tells me you're not going to chase this cat, I have to add this day to the end of this sentence. Otherwise, I'd be lying. Even in English, if you say, I heard you weren't going to chase the cat, it's kind of a hedge, right? Oh, I heard this. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, right? But in Kiowa, if you add this, then you're actually saying that it's true. If you want to just say that you heard it, then you have to add, I heard. Now that's the easy stuff. Now Kiowa also has what's called polysynthesis, which is a feature that, again, was discovered in American languages, but has been seen elsewhere, but it is a hallmark of American languages. And it basically allows long strings of words to be constructed around the verb. So this is a verb from the Crow language. I won't pronounce it, but it's basically an entire sentence. And all the parts are there. So this is, I'm declaring that we are looking for someone who will go carrying you to Billings. And it's pronounced as a single word. Kiowa has this too, to a different extent. So you can get a sentence like this. Yeah, oh boy, koi kutai get dal. I will truly know how to write Kiowa. And it's basically saying, to me, it will become informed to truly write Kiowa. But it all gets put into one word. And so, as linguists, we have to figure out, right, how does this word get built? What kind of restrictions are there? And not just to figure out how the buffet works, but also if you're going to have children who grow up speaking Kiowa, they have to know how to do that. And if all you know is English, this is a completely foreign building system. So how do you transmit that? Now, my one research area is Native American languages, but in Kiowa specifically, but I'm also a semanticist. And semantics is the study of meaning. It overlaps with what's called pragmatics, which is extra-linguistic meaning. So for instance, if I'm in a classroom and I ask, can anyone tell me how many Native American tribes there are in the United States?
500.
500. That's the best guess I've ever heard. I usually get 50 or something. Yeah, it's 563 officially recognized ones. But notice that the answer, the way that I asked the question, right, does anyone know? That's what we call a yes or no question. Because the answer to a yes/no question is yes or no. Now when I'm in class, I lead with something like that. Does anyone know who the first president was? And they say, George Washington. No, that's wrong. John Hanson? No, that's wrong too. Right? Because the answer is yes. Somebody knows. Right? But nobody, right, it sounds silly, right? But that's because semantically that's a yes or no question, but pragmatically we've been acculturated to associate that form of question with a slightly different meaning. If you know the answer, tell me what the answer is. Or if you're at the table and you ask someone, can you pass me the salt?
Sure.
Only a jerk would say, yeah. Right? Because yeah, they're ignoring the pragmatics on purpose, right? And that kind of meaning plays a huge role in how we understand each other. I mean, a lot of times we actually have more content in the things we're not saying than we do in the things we are saying. And a lot of times when people argue with each other, it's because of those things we're not saying. And so we have arguments we don't even know why. Now, I do formal semantics, which is essentially semantics plus math. And it's kind of the daunting area of linguistics, although it's not terribly complicated. It's not mathematically complicated. But it involves things like set theory and lambda calculus. And for the linguists who got into linguistics to get away from math, it's like the dark area over the hills. But what formalism does is it allows us to be precise. It gives us precision in meaning, allows us to capture things precisely and in ways that allow us to make predictions, which is crucial. So this is a paper I wrote from a paper I recently have. It's about to come out. And this is what almost means. Makes total sense, right? Now basically, in ordinary English, it says, if you're close enough, there's only a handful of, I should say, there's a small enough number of things that you need to do to succeed. Or a small enough set of things that you need to do to get to a point where you can project yourself into the future and seeing you're succeeding. That's what that says. But it does so in a very formalized way that's unintelligible. Right? I can't, you know, if I did this for Kiowa, for the Kiowa word me, which means almost, right? This would not help the community, right? To say, this is what this word means. So this has to be translated. And so, but in my research, I do this kind of thing for Kiowa. And for other linguists who know what all those symbols mean, right? This makes sense. And so I travel to Kiowa country, the chance I get, and then I do what are called native speaker tasks. I'll ask them for translations. How do you say this? And I'll ask them for judgments, where I come up with a sentence and see if it's good. And using these, and instead of asking speakers to think about things, we want them to react naturally, to get at that unconscious linguistic knowledge. And so when we're doing semantics, we kind of have to tweak it to get a true or false judgment, because we want the semantics depends on the facts of the world. Right? If I say the lights are off, that's true or false, depending on how the world is. And the meaning of of the word off depends on those conditions as well. And so if I want to know how to say the lights are off in Kiowa, I have to put a scenario in the speaker's mind where the lights are off and see if it's true. Or a scenario where the lights are on, and I should expect them to say that it's false. And you can do this with context. So let's say this is what I was doing this summer, looking at locatives. So a word like hawball, which means near, is translated as near, but how close is that, right? So you could come up with context like, oh, well, imagine Amy is 3 feet from the teepee. And I say, Amy toha bale. Is that true? Right? The speaker says yes. Okay, so I know that 3 feet from a teepee is close. And you can do this over and over with different distances and so forth, and you can get a kind of sense of what nearness is. The downside is that speakers have to imagine these things. Some speakers are more imaginative than others. Some people don't like to imagine. And some people get tired of saying 3 feet, 3 feet. Okay, what about 4 feet? What about 5 feet? You can test people's patience really quickly, right? So another way to do it is to use pictures. So I'll set up, or in this case I brought little toys and made a little teepee out of a cup. And then I just set people up in different ways, and I would say, Amy toha bale, or Bill toha agya. Bill is sitting close to the teepee. In this case, that would be false. He's not sitting near it or anything like that. But you can essentially just make up context and get to a sense of what these things mean.
How many Kiowa speakers are there?
That's a good question. How many Kiowa speakers are there? Again, it depends on what you mean by that. But as far as first language native speakers, maybe a few dozen.
Really?
Yeah. Some people would say as low as a dozen.
Really?
It depends, yeah.
What's the total population now of Kiowa?
The tribe has about 12,000 members.
What was it when it was biggest?
12,000 members. This is probably the biggest it's ever been.
Oh, really?
At the time of the first allotment census, there were about 2,100. But that was after a series of epidemics of smallpox, cholera, whooping cough throughout the 19th century.
War.
And a little bit of war, yeah. So we're not exactly sure how many people there had been. It could have been 12,000. It could have been 20. We don't know for sure. But we do know that some tribes, a lot of tribes would lose half to 2/3 to 90% of a population in one epidemic.
Right.
And so if you have 3 or 4 of these in a series in one generation, it's hard to tell exactly. We're not
What
sure.
led you into this study?
His grandfather.
So how did I get into Kiowa?
Linguistics.
Or into linguistics? I got into languages in high school. Having been interested mainly in geography before that, in human geography. And so I kind of shifted from the human's relation to place and into languages. And then an older brother who had been to college and heard of linguistics suggested I try it.
Ah.
And so when I got to college, I tried it. And then I stuck with it. So I was one of the rare people who actually went into college as a linguistics major.
Do you have a reservation experience?
A reservation experience? No. No, so my family, I lived, I guess, just outside of the area where most Kiowas live. And there hasn't been a reservation since 1901, basically. And so...
An actual physical reservation?
Correct.
For how long?
Since 1901.
Really?
Right. So Oklahoma actually, for all the tribes that live there, there's only one reservation. That's the Osage Reservation.
Right.
And it's not that much of a reservation. I mean, there are a lot of white towns in it, so I don't know why it's called that. But for the most part, for the rest of the tribes, there was just allotment, and then, so the territory is,
So when you
the tribes still have this kind of territory. It's kind of an exclusion zone against other tribes. So the Chickasaws have this certain zone where they have, if there's tribal business, then they're the tribe that handles it. But there's no reservation.
So when you say that Kiowa are in southern Oklahoma, you mean there's a bunch of Kiowa living there, and that's what they call Kiowa reservation? Because you used Kiowa Reservation earlier.
There was a reservation,
Right.
and it's in that zone.
Ah.
Right. And that zone is now the tribal territory. But it's really, it's not, so it's kind of overlaid over the state, but the state has jurisdiction in it except on actual tribal property.
So do the Kiowa in Oklahoma have a Kiowa government?
Yes, yes. So yeah, each of the tribes has a tribal government, and there's a seat of government that's in the town of Carnegie. And then the tribes themselves will manage a lot of the federal programs. So for instance, the Head Start program is a federal program,
Right.
but for the tribal members, they just hand the money to the tribes. Right? And the same goes for some of the health and other welfare issues as well.
Are all of the native speakers that you work with elderly?
Yes. Yeah, the youngest one is in her 70s.
Wow.
The oldest one I worked with was 95.
In your
At the time.
department, part of my fascination with the presentation today is, hell, I don't know my English. I should, obviously. Is there someone teaching how you examine English and get the bugs out?
Oh, sure.
Well, it's funny you say bugs, because for a linguist, the bugs are features. So whenever people do things differently from the norm, a linguist is like, oh, that's interesting.
Right.
It's part of the buffet. And linguistically, there's not inherently a norm, right? Everyone has their own variety. And so what we call a norm is essentially just the variety that has the most prestige. And the variety that has the most prestige is a reflection of the people who have the most prestige. And so it's not something that linguists are in control of.
So when these precious elders that we're talking about
Yeah.
pass away, is there going to be enough grammar, dictionary, text to bring Kiowa alive for children, for other, whatever, to keep it from dying?
Right. That's actually where my current project lies. So I mentioned that we have a lot of documentation, but the documentation that we see for most languages focuses on sound structures, word structures, and sentence building structures. But they don't focus on the semantics. And the study of and part of that is just a time issue. The study of semantics in the modern sense is very young. It's younger than me. And so all of these issues haven't been explored for many of these languages in detail. More and more people are looking at individual issues and things like that, but no one's really documented them. And so what my project is actually doing is documenting all of these things in a formal way, relying on these fieldwork techniques, and then writing that up in a way that other linguists can use in order to do the same kinds of tests with the languages in their communities. Because a lot of linguists are not trained in formal semantics. It's a relatively young field. And so if I just wrote the results up, that would help, a little bit, but it wouldn't help as much as it could. So what I really want to do with this grammar is something that we can take with the community and develop materials out of, and also that other linguists can take with their communities. And that's something that no one's really done before. So I don't have a model. And when I say a formal thing, I'm talking about things like this. So I could say, here's some prepositional kinds of things. There are postpositions in Kiowa. And you can make a list, and you can give the translations, and that's pretty good. But we can be more precise using formal semantics and talk about exactly the kinds of things that are going on. So in this case, this is an event modifier. it's a long story. Or when you convert it to a temporal modifier, so you can say this means in, so in the house, or it can mean at a certain time. And then the transition from one to another is something that it is not always obvious. And so one thing that I'm trying to do is get a sense of how these meanings fit together.
I was wondering,
How broadly are the 12,000 enrolled members dispersed?
About half live in that area,
Oh, really?
and then about another half of the rest live in Oklahoma, and then most of the rest actually live in California.
Really?
In the 50s, the U.S. government promoted Indians to move away from their tribes,
Oh, yeah.
and actually tried to terminate the status of tribes. And so they gave them incentives, and a lot of people moved to California.
I want to thank you for making this presentation. I'm going to call an end because it's 12 o'clock, but if people have some questions, can they ask later? Or
Yes.
For a few minutes?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we disperse, do remember that our illustrious chancellor of this university is our guest next week. I am trying to write letters to 10 families to join us. Do make an effort to reach out and bring a really nice crowd to hear him. We owe him that, do we not?
Yes, we do.
I have a question.
Yes.
What churches sent missionaries to the